There are 19 million war veterans living in the United States today. 19 million men and women who've lived extraordinary lives. 19 million stories worth telling. Stories about big wars and small gestures. These are the Americans who witnessed history. These are the wars as seen through their eyes. These are the stories of veterans from World War I, World War II, and the Korean, Vietnam, and Persian Gulf Wars. Each day, we lose 1,500 of those who served, and we lose more of our history as their stories go untold.
Recording those stories is a part of America's history. The entire story will come together when you tell your part of it.
Millions of Americans. Millions of stories. Tell your story. Ask others theirs. There's no story or sacrifice too small.
I urge all Americans, veterans and non-veterans alike, to participate in this very, very important project. Veterans help to shape our nation's future. And only by understanding what they did for us can we truly understand the price of freedom.
Hello, my name is Frank Boring. I am the Director of Oral History at the Michigan Military Preservation Society. We are a nonprofit organization that's building the Michigan Military Air, Land, and Sea Museum at the Gerald R. Ford International Airport. What you've just seen is an excerpt from a promotional film that was put out by the Library of Congress Veterans History Project. The Library of Congress Veterans History Project is an attempt to gather material, oral histories, documents, diaries, letters from all over the country of our veterans. Here at the Michigan Military Museum, we are a partner archive with the Library of Congress. What this means is that all the materials that we gather stay here in Michigan. We identify them, we put them into a database, and we will make them available to future generations to access through our website. What you're about to see is a raw, uncut oral history interview. At some later date, we will actually edit these and make them available through the schools. At this point, you will have an opportunity to see what it's like to have an actual oral history interview. These will be going on each week with a different veteran. We hope you enjoy. My name is Frank Boring. I'm the Director of Oral History for the Michigan Military Preservation Society. Could we begin with you, Gerd, on where and when were you born?
I was born December 10th, 1923 in Rodach, which is just 10 miles west of Coburg and in the state of Bavaria.
And what was your early schooling like?
Well, I went to the kindergarten in Rodach, age 5, till I was 6, ready for public school. Then I had 4 years of public school in Rodach. My dad was transferred to Coburg, so the family moved. And he insisted that, my dad did, that I try my exam, entry exam for high school, which I could do after the 4th year of public school. That was the system in Germany at that time.
What did your father do at this time?
At that time he was for IRS, worked for IRS.
So he was not in the military at this time?
No.
Okay, all right. Tell us a little bit about your family, brothers and sisters, any of your relatives?
I'm the oldest of 5 boys. And I have no sister, it was just boys, 5 boys. And our dad was very strict, and I think some of it goes back to his military upbringing, because as a very young man, with his stepbrother, they were on the military academy in Flensburg-Mürwik, which was the naval academy. And that was right 1914, something like that.
So you had relatives that were in World War I then?
I had relatives in World War I and also in the artillery. The other stepbrother was a general later on in the artillery stationed in Russia. And the oldest one was also a stepbrother, because my grandfather was married 3 times. And he became, after World War I, he was on coastal patrol. My dad decided to get out, but he stayed and was just coastal patrol, whatever they had, these little boats they were going around with.
Okay.
And he became later on the captain of the battleship Bismarck under the rear admiral, which actually was the fault and lost the ship, because he wouldn't do what my uncle requested, that they take on fuel and all that for the run to Brest.
Let's talk about your high school. I understand from high school you also went into what is called practical school. If you could describe.
Well, from high school, because you cannot go after I was only 14 years old. I couldn't go to college. So during that time I decided what I wanted to be. I wanted to be a mechanical engineer. So in order to be a mechanical engineer, I had to select a school. So I selected the engineering school of Ilmenau. It was right on the edge of the Thuringia, the state of Thuringia. And I had to go there to make my exam test. And they accepted me. And they actually demanded what I should be doing now. That I have to take a practicum of 2 years. So I went for 2 years into the industry in Winsheim, which is a little town outside of Nuremberg. And Illesheim was the next little town, was an Air Force base, a German Air Force base, which my dad later on commanded.
Now, from engineering school, you then, I understand, went into college. Is that correct?
Well, that took a while. First of all, I did my 2 years practicum, which started with the foundry, core making, floor molding, machine molding, and then machining to the drafting room. So with that knowledge, they tested you for that back in school again when you reported back, that you had basic knowledge, so they know what you understand what the professors were talking about when they talked about Malbline, cast iron, steel, or whatever. Because that's not all book learning in Germany. It's a little bit different. And
So
I did a course in the meantime, which the school recommended, because I asked them what I could do, and they said, well, we have a male course. You can take 2 semesters, 2 written semesters, and we would send you the papers for what you have to study and the books. And then you can make up to 3, but very few of them make up to 3 semesters. So they have to come back to the school actually.
but your studies were interrupted at some point.
Well, I went back to Ilmenau to start my 3rd semester, so to speak, up the first one on school, when we had a group of visitors, and there were officers from the SS, from the Navy, from the Air Force and the Army, which were looking for volunteers, because we were 16, 17 years old. And we had only a few which volunteered for the Air Force and the Navy, but none for the SS. I still remember today the SS officer was so mad that nobody, and he called us every name under the sun, you know, like yellow bellies and everything else. that he would get even with us. And he did. We were all drafted into the infantry. This was his revenge. And just right now, you know, within 3 weeks, we had our marching orders. And we were still actually, according to what was called up, we were a year too young. But that didn't make any difference. Once he pulled the plug, we got our marching papers.
So where did you go from there?
From there, we had to report in Nuremberg, in the barracks down there, and the military barracks, where he gave us a medical. And then we had an officer there from the army, and he said, well, you people are all technical people. Why are you in the infantry? So we told him what happened. And he said, well, we can't change that. And first of all, you're all officers' material with your background. So let's go, and we sent you to the NCO school in Potsdam here. So that's why I ended up for my basic training.
Let me ask you two questions. One, when you were drafted, what was the reaction of your family?
Well, my dad said, we could fight it, you know. We got enough power among us. He meant amongst the brothers. But I said, no, don't get yourself involved, you know, not with this, because that could be dangerous.
You know, we have a conception of the SS in this day and age, but at that time they were that feared within Germany?
Oh yes, definitely. The SS had all the power. An SS private had more power than an officer in the Army, Air Force, or the Navy. He could shoot you right now without any questions asked.
So this was
his word would go over anybody's.
So even at that age, you were aware of that?
That's right.
Okay.
Well, my dad told me about it. He said, don't tackle with them.
Your reaction to being drafted, and then your reaction to being told that you're going to go to NCO, you must have been relieved.
Well, in a way I was relieved. But then the NCO school was in Potsdam, which is the state of Prussia. And us and Bavarians and Prussians are like this. So we didn't know what to expect, and we were 3 guys, you know, from Bavaria to be sent up to Prussia to the office, to the NCO school. And the NCO school at that time was pretty rough stuff.
Well, tell us about it. What do you mean by rough stuff?
Like I said, we measured the parade ground on our belly, you know, a lot of times. We were more laying on the floor than we were standing up on our feet, and scraping out incinerators on weekends for pleasure, you know, with toothbrushes, or mopping the hallways, which were tiles with little grooves in there, and the NCO would dump a whole bucket of sand in it. And as long as that would crushed underneath there, we never got out. So our weekend was gone, you know, we were scrubbing.
This is very much like the description of American basic training. Where
That's right.
So were you yelled at? Were you treated?
That's right, that's
okay.
right, because you have to realize that most of the instructors on these schools were 12-year men. That means they signed up for 12 years. They had more brawn than brain. And a lot of times they were not the smartest guys in the world, you know, but they knew what they were doing. They were rough and tough.
Give us an idea of what your environment was like. I mean, where did you sleep? What was it? You got up in the morning. What did you do on a typical day?
On a typical day, like you get up in the morning at 6 o'clock. You sleep with 4 guys in a room. And you have a study desk. And that's it. So you make your bed and take care of it. Then you have your breakfast. One of the guys has to go with a coffee can, and get the coffee and the rations. They were in cardboard boxes. And we ate in our room. And that was prescribed, like so many pieces of bread and a little bit of butter, and the rest of it was marmalade, or a preservative of some kind. And then at 7 o'clock, we were out there on the parade ground.
Go ahead. So what happened on the parade ground?
On the parade ground, like I said, for good measure, they separated the rank because we were 3 deep. First one, 2 step forward, last one, 2 step backwards. And then down we went on deck. We were laying already there pumping, Give me 20. With bifall, that means clap in your hands. So they had their fun with us. But it started already when we got close. When we picked up our uniforms, shoes and everything else and helmet. That was the fiasco. If you want to talk about comical, that's the way we looked. Because we always got the wrong stuff, either was too small or it was too big and much too big, You got a helmet went down to here. You got a pair of shoes you can turn around in, like violin boxes. You couldn't use it, You had to run back and forth to the supply to exchange it. But that went after. They kept you busy the first day, all day long, with just exchanging stuff. And they were laughing like crazy because it was a riot. So we finally got dressed in what we got, and the drill uniform, and Knobelbecher, what we call, they were short boots.
So the push-ups and the basic calisthenics, was there also hiking and any of that kind of training?
Well, this is what we did during the whole thing, We got our rifles issued, then we did rifle drill and everything, and then learned how to march, and all. That's typical military.
So what happened in the evening?
In the evening, we had a book which was issued to it that was called the Reibert, and that was the military doctrine, really. And it gave you everything: how to salute, how to stand, how to use your rifle, how to take care of it, how to take care of your uniform and everything else. And you're supposed to know that. And from a group of 6 to platoon, to a company, what is expected and the way that works.
Now, give us an idea. You say there's 4 per barracks. Was it a barrack or 4 per?
Per room, 4 per room.
In a barracks?
In a barracks, yeah.
Approximately how many people were in a barracks?
The whole outfit was 1 battalion. The whole school was 1 battalion, consisting of 4 companies of 120.
Okay, now you've gone through basic training. I assume there was some kind of ceremony letting you know that you finished?
Yes.
What was that like?
Well, they really put us through it, The base commander was on his horse, and we had to go back in parade with the rifles, and through different exercises. There were no parents there or anything. was just between them and us.
Did you feel a sense of accomplishment that you finished?
We felt a sense of accomplishment that we even were alive, because during the course, 4 guys hung themselves because they couldn't take it. And the base commander, he came right out and he said, look, I don't mind cutting a few off every day if that is what you want. Because if you don't want to learn, that's up to you. We don't give, we take. We tell you what to do. You don't tell us.
Was there any kind of indoctrination classes or things?
Yeah, you went to classes. You had regular classes. They were spread over a week's time, and they were about 1.5 hours every day. They could be in the evening, they could be in the morning. It depended on what the school schedule was, the training schedule, because we didn't have trucks to move around. We walked. We walked to the firing range, and at that time, you know, we had target shooting there. We were laying on an elevated table, like, with a sandbag in front to put the rifle on it. And it was nothing new or different, because there was competition from one platoon to the other and from one group to the other, you know. That the staff sergeant, which was standing on the side of that piece of blank you were laying on for shooting, that he would lift it up. If you had that wave off sign, you weren't even on the target, you know. He lifted that up on the one side and threw you right on the ground. And then you run around for a while, or up and down, pumping, before you got back on to shoot again. Well, you were so shaky already from jumping around that you didn't hit anything.
Now, from
but
basic
that wasn't my problem. I was doing all right, but I tried to stay calm, you know, through all this, because they wouldn't. I don't know if you ever tried to climb a birch tree. They're very slippery. And these sergeants, they didn't hesitate. They take the bayonet out and stick you in the rear end. Get going, get going. You slipped always down again, you know.
So from basic training, you've graduated from basic training.
Yeah.
What did they tell you you're going to do next? Where are you going next?
Well, they said you can go on and choose the regular army, or we can specify you. We can tell you if your officer's material or not, from what you accomplished here. And I was one out of, we probably were 15% out of the group which was recommended to go to the academy in Potsdam.
During this period of time, were you communicating with your father or your family by letter or anything like that?
Very little, once a week.
Okay. Because your father had been in the military. Did you ask him any advice during this period of time?
No,
Okay.
no, he wouldn't give me any advice. When I was drafted at that time, I said, you do what you have to do, but don't go beyond it.
Okay, so were you pleased that you were going to go to officer school?
Well, in a way I was pleased, because for the simple reason that I get away from this a little bit. You know, because like I said, there was nothing new. If there was a heavy rain, we were called out, right? No matter if that was in the middle of the night, and we were on our belly all the way across the exercise area and the mud field in the back. And we looked like mud. With the way we went with rifle and all, we went right underneath the showers and just turned them on. You know, and just washed all the muck off. And I don't think it was much different in the American Army, peacetime Army, you know, from what I understood.
Sure.
They were just about as rough.
So how did you get, the basic training was in one location, officer school was in another location.
Yes.
You said about 15% of your graduating class went. Did you all go on a train to get there, or how did you get to the?
Yeah, we got on a train that time to Potsdam itself, and from Potsdam on, we walked again. You know, they didn't want to spoil us. So we walked again to the officer school.
Now, describe for us.
Which was in Töberitz.
Okay, describe for us the officers' school. I mean, were there barracks? Were there buildings?
There were stone buildings. They were permanently built, you know, because there was a tradition in Potsdam on that. The military schools were all in, was heavy in Potsdam. Then for artillery, they were heavy in Hanover. Different places, you know, they specialize in different areas.
Give us an idea of the activity. You arrived there, and if you were watching a movie, for example, were there just 3 or 4 people walking around, or was there this buzz of activity going on when you arrived there?
Well, when we arrived there, right away there were sergeants there again, which put us into groups, you know, and they said, okay, now we'll walk you to your quarters. So there were 2 tour rooms. Because that's where heavy studying was going on.
So this is a physical building. This is not like barracks that
No,
this is a building.
building.
It's almost like a dormitory, like a
Right,
college
right,
or something.
right.
Okay, okay.
And then the school rooms and everything, they were fairly good size, depending what they were teaching.
Mm-hmm.
If they were teaching like strategy on a sandbox and stuff like that, or a history, they had a large aula with chairs and tables in front of it.
Now this
So you
history was
could
military history.
Yeah.
Okay, okay. Now, I've talked to American vets who have talked about their training, and they said it was almost all given in World War I type tactics. Would you say that was accurate with your training? Was it pretty much holdovers from World War I teaching you?
No. Because in the basic training, I would say probably. But on the officer school, it was somewhat different, because Rommel at that time was commander on that school. You know, and he was an officer in World War I, and he had the Pullman, you know, and everything. He was a highly respected officer. And he was also in the 100,000 man army.
Now, let's get an idea of this new environment you're in. You're called awake in the morning by a bell, or is it people came by and knocked on your door, and then what happened from there? Okay, tell us about it. Nobody knows.
On each floor, they had a bugler right in the middle of each floor, because these barracks were long, you know, like 100 yards and 4 floors. So they were standing there with the bugle in the middle and turned one way or another. And then you were out rushing for the shower room, you know, and everything else, and get your bed made, because there were no maids there. You did everything yourself. In the evening, you polished your boots and everything and put them back in your locker. And you had inspections off and on. You never know when they would happen. What he looked if your shirts were all nicely folded and everything was in the right place. If not, they just threw it all out on the floor and you start all over again. Or to turn your bed upside down, you know, and you start new. But it wasn't quite as bad as the basic.
Well, let's, for example, the food that you ate in basic training compared to the food at officer school.
Well, you still got all the same, you know, the food was about the same. They didn't spoil you, you know. That was mostly one big kettle, had everything in it. And you got one scoop, you know. There were no pork chops or anything like that, you know.
Was there a sense of camaraderie amongst?
Yes,
okay.
That camaraderie was already in basic training, because that's the only way to survive. So you could talk one guy to the other, you know, and say, watch him, you know, don't do this. If you do that, you're gonna get it. Because he's just waiting for that step you do.
Now, in officer school, you're studying history, you're studying tactics, you're studying a number of different things.
Weapons and everything. And the same time I was called in and I said, well, you got your pilot's license? I said, yes, I had mine with 16 because I learned glider flying in the Rhön in Germany, and some of my friends, which became later on very much known. Joachim Massé, all of them guys, you know.
So
I had my fight, they said, well, we can cross-train you, why didn't you select the Air Force? And I said, well, I didn't want any protection from my dad. So I took the Army. And he said, well, you want to stay in the infantry? No, I want to be in tanks.
Well, this comes as a complete surprise now. Why tanks?
Well, because I was mechanically inclined, and I liked machinery, I liked engines and things like that, so I wanted to go into tanks.
Now, in some cases, especially when I talk to pilots, they think, well, they want to become a pilot, but they want to be a fighter pilot because that's like, was there a sense of tanks being something special to you?
Well, it wasn't so special anymore after we got transferred into a different block, because there was in the hallway, there was a huge mural, and it depicted a tank battle, and it said underneath, the life of a tank man is short but powerful. I said, that doesn't mean us. You know, but so you started to wonder right away, what's going on? So this was already after the Polish War and after the Czechoslovakia, So we had Skoda tanks, if you believe it or not, Czech tanks.
Now, is this in the same place, this officer school?
Yeah.
Okay.
They had these tanks there,
So they really did give you the choice. You said you want to go to tanks, and they let you go into tanks.
That's right.
Now,
I was on the same school.
Now, there's a number of different aspects to a tank. Since you were training to be an officer, then you would be in charge of a tank.
Yeah.
Okay.
Or a tank group,
Or
like
a tank crew. Okay.
4 of them, or the 4 tanks, it all depends what rank you can get out of it.
Okay.
Or how well the evaluation was for you.
Okay.
If you had a good evaluation, well, that was fine. The higher up you got.
This is important because these are the kind of details that are just not readily available. So when you went into this, it didn't necessarily mean, even though you were an officer, it didn't necessarily mean that you would be running a tank group or a...
No.
You had no guarantee until
you
you
have
passed.
no guarantee of anything like that.
Okay.
You could be running in maintenance,
That's what I'm trying to find out. Very
No,
good.
there was no definite way that you could say, well, I be this or I be that or that. Well, the thing is, what I found out later on from one of our so-called sergeants, which was a drunkard, he never had enough money to pay for his stuff. And one day, that was so funny, we went out, and he took a liking to me for one reason or another, I don't know why, because I always had money or something, I don't know. So I paid his bill most of the time, because he had no money. He was married, but he didn't want to go home. He wanted to stay in the barracks. He switched with other ones to be sergeant of the day, just to be able to stay in the barracks. And it was really funny. And I said, what gives that you don't want to go home? He said, well, as soon as I open up the door, the wife is all over me. She wants sex, and that's why I'm not going home. And one day he was enough lit, but I think he still knew what he was doing. He said, I said, what's new? And I said, well, there is something new. I said, what is it? I shouldn't tell you, but you probably know from your dad and from your uncles, because they all knew who we were. And he said, they are looking for volunteers for Afrika Korps. But don't ever tell that I told you that. And I said, well, how can I get to the Afrika Korps? I know where we're supposed to go. The whole class was supposed to go to General Guderian, to the tank general, you know, and he was stationed in Silesia. And he was like, how should I say, like Patton. He would eat lieutenants for breakfast, you know. You stand guard in white gloves. I didn't want that. So I said, how do you get in the Afrika Korps? Well, you have to report to the base commander. And he has the order to transfer you. If he likes it or not, he has the order to transfer you. So I thought, okay, that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to ask for a report. So I told the staff sergeant, I want to have a report with the base commander. What for? I said, well, I will tell the base commander. He didn't like the answer, but he said, okay, I will put you on the list. So about 3 days later, right in the morning after Rafley, he came and he said, okay, I have to take you over to the headquarters. So I went over there, got in the door, while he had already my file on his desk, because he knew that I wanted to see him. So when I went in, saluted and everything, so he asked me what the matter is. I said, I want to volunteer for Afrika Korps. He used to fell off his chair. And I knew he started to say, how did you know? But he didn't finish it, because now he didn't know who gave me the information for my uncles. And he didn't want to get into a pissing contest, so to speak of. And he said, that upsets everything here, because we have standing orders that this whole group is going to one area only. And now I'm short. So I have to do some explaining or to pull somebody pretty fast in here. I would hear from him. So that was fine. So about a week later, the staff sergeant came and said, you're going to be transferred to Ansbach. I said, why to Ansbach? Well, he said, this is your county district for military draftees, you know. So they assign you to an area which would be a reserve unit or a whatever. So I got to Ansbach. I was in Ansbach, which is from Winsheim, where my dad was living then. My family was living, only about 20 kilometers.
Oh, I turned this off. I'm sorry. I'm very, very sorry. Okay.
And so I got transferred there. And they said, we don't know what to do with you. When I went to the office there, we actually should send you to Kaiserslautern, to the Panzerkaserne, the tanks. So he said, let us work that out. You will know in 2 days. So they came already the next day and he said, here are your transfer paper to Kaiserslautern. In the meantime, I got already my promotion as lieutenant. In Ansbach it came already, that I was considered to be done with my course. And a funny thing happened during that course. I should go back a little bit. You have, during your history lessons, you have in the huge assembly hall, you have paintings from war times, you know, and they assign you one. Like there's a helmet there, and in that helmet are numbers. And on the pictures are numbers. And out of your mind, you should tell a little story what that picture tells you. And you knew what I drew? The retreat of Napoleon from Russia. That's the picture I drew. So I looked at that picture for a while, and then I came up with a little story, you know, with all these peasants around with sticks, you know, and everything, and shovels and forks, how they hated these troops. So I just told anybody who is foolish enough to go into Russia is running himself to death. Napoleon proved that Russia is so big that you cannot conquer it. There is no way. And figuring out what happened later on, not in that short area, you know, I told a little bit more, the impressions on the people's faces, you know, and all that. But it happened.
Yeah. You know, you brought up an interesting point here. Early on in the interview, you mentioned that you joined the Army because you didn't want to have the influence of your family. Now you're talking about the officer who had to face the fact that you're requesting to go to North Africa as opposed to going with the whole group. It causes him problems. So your family was fairly well known then?
Yes.
Okay. They wielded a certain amount of respect or power, or?
Oh yeah, well, they were fairly well to do, and had a lot of military time and experience and everything.
So on your part, you really were trying to, especially at that age, prove yourself on your own without your
own.
families.
That's right.
But at the same time, that was always in the background, I imagine. That your
Well,
family
it was in the background, and I said, well, maybe I do the foolish thing that I didn't do what my dad wanted me to do, or what my uncle wanted me to do, the one in the Navy, or the one in the Army, in the artillery, you know. So later on, these things come more back to your mind, but you don't know how the whole thing would have played out. For a simple reason. The one in the artillery was tied in with the underground, with Lord Mayor Gerd Lindemann from Leipzig, who was leader of the underground. And he had a lot of people, like how Germans are, very thorough, you know, everything has to be marked down and documented. They found that list after the attempt of Hitler's life. And he was on it, so was Rommel on it. He didn't even know. Yeah. But he was on it for one reason only, that he was so highly respected by the Western forces that they assumed that he would be the only one who would be able to peace talk or a ceasefire or whatever.
That's amazing.
That's why he had to be killed.
Yeah. All right, so now you're a lieutenant. What was your first assignment then?
Well, when I checked in Kaiserslautern, a captain was the company commander. And he brought us in. I was the first officer there. So he called me into his office and he said, since you're the first officer here, there will be volunteers coming from various areas. So why don't you put a company together you get all the papers from the people, which are transferred in here. So, and since you're the first, you got the best choice. So pick your people wisely and put a company together. You know how many tanks you're going to be in a company, so therefore you know how many radio men you're going to need, how many gunners you're going to need, and how many drivers and so forth, and how many commanders. So go by that. So I made a big spreadsheet for 20 tanks, you know.
Did you have somebody assisting you at this time? Or you?
No, I was all by myself, because I was the first officer there. See, and I didn't, they were just coming in. So I had a whole bunch of papers from all the different guys, and I went through, and I looked at their background. If they were in jail, you know, or anything, you know, like even in military, you know, if they had a court-martial on them or whatever. Or their background, basically, and their occupation. If they were mechanics, car mechanics, truck drivers, or whatever. So you could train them very easily, you know. So you looked at that. And they had a good report with the company they left, like as a sharpshooters or stuff like that. Well, you can use him as a gunner if he's that good. And that's how it's happened. That's how I put the company together.
Now, at this time, other officers, I mean, while you're doing this, other officers are now coming in. They're starting to form their own companies.
That's right.
Give us an idea of the kind of the activity that's going on. Did you have staff meetings at some point, or?
Not at that time. At that time, as soon as we had a tank crew together, like I had quite a few choices to get a good tank crew, we got tanks assigned to us, brand new, Mark IIIs. So we got that, and then as soon as the whole company was together, we got Africa uniforms, we got all our equipment.
Was there any training for desert warfare?
Not for desert warfare. There was sandy ground there where we were, and there was also artillery there, and there was a maneuver ground, and that's where we went to train with the artillery. And we plowed around in the woods there and everything else, and the roads. But it was a lot of fun in a way, but on the other side, there was no direct desert training. We got some handbooks, you know, what to look for and so forth, but
how to dig a foxhole?
yeah, and end up with a mold, you know, because sand just runs in. But how useful a sandbag can be, you know, and stuff like that. And how important it is to clean the weapon constantly. If you got nothing else to do, clean your weapon, because sand will be drifting all the time, will be blowing all the time.
During this period, did you have any indication of what your enemy was going to be like?
No, because they said from what they got back from Africa, most of the troops which would be against us on the other side would be mostly colonial troops, South Africans, English troops, blacks, you know, from the colonies, and very few English. English would be mostly the officers.
You know,
and high-ranking non-coms.
During the training for Americans against the Japanese, there was this sense that the Japanese couldn't fight. So was there that kind of indication to you about the colonials, that they couldn't fight?
No.
Okay.
The only thing what they told us, basically with colonial troops, especially with Indonesians and stuff like that, and some of the black colonials, some of the Gurkhas and the Sheiks, you know, they don't take too much to alcohol. They can get pretty wild. So don't expect much, because they rather use their knives than give you a partner of anything, you know, I mean. They're quick on the knives.
So there really was some indication of warning to you that you're going to be fighting up against an enemy that was
Yeah,
you have to be careful of.
that's right.
Okay.
So that much they had, but at the same time, we also, that came later on in Africa itself. But they couldn't give us much information because they were not really deeply involved yet. Because they were just getting ready. And at that time, the so-called Afrika Korps was 15,000 men. That was the first commitment, you know, one division.
Now, where was Rommel at this time? Is he the head of the Afrika Korps?
While he was still in Europe, you know, he had different companies, different regiments and stuff like that, and divisions, because he was in France, involved pretty heavy. And then when he came out of that, he tried to reorganize battle strategy for tanks and everything, because he was basically an infantryman.
Now,
So he switched into something which was also new to him, but he learned fast in Poland and in France.
okay, so he was not in charge of the Afrika Korps at the moment you were talking about.
While first it was the Italians, you know, but that wasn't called Afrika Korps. That was the Italian army in Africa, which wasn't very much. But it changed pretty fast because Rommel knew we couldn't have German troops on the Italian command because it was too different. Because they had 4 kitchens, we had 1. They had for the GIs a kitchen. They had for a medium to the higher ranking NCOs. They had for the next group was officers, up to a certain point, up to major, I think. And then anything above major, they had their own, they had another kitchen. They're living high off the hog with a little guy got a piece of bread, you know, stale bread or something.
So now, how did you get to North Africa? Because you then went to North Africa, right?
Right.
At this point, how did you get there?
Well, after I had the company together and we had about 4 weeks of training, field training, with our equipment, we cleaned it all up. They had already the sandy beige color on it and everything. We got our mop boxes, which give you your watches, you know, and sidearm, uniform, boots, whatever you needed, underwear, whatever, socks. And then the rest of the guys got their stuff. And then we trained with the tanks, like I said before. And there was some introduction, what to expect, which we didn't even know ourselves, but reading out of a stack of papers, you know, typewritten papers. And we went through it every day to a certain amount of stuff. And then asked questions if the guys really watched it and understood, and not were half asleep in one ear out the other. So then I was told our marching orders could come any day to get our equipment together, get it all cleaned up, get it greased, oil changes made, gassed up, and ammunition. And the rest of it we would receive in Africa. That was fine. And about within a half a week, it was about 4 days, we were told to roll the tanks downtown to the freight cars, you know, the flatbed, and load them. So we had loading rams, and we rolled them onto the flatbed and secured them like with V-blocks, you know, hammer them right down to the bed of the flatbed ones.
How many tanks are we talking about here?
3 tanks on a flatbed.
Okay, but how many total?
Pardon me?
How many total?
Well, I had my company only.
Right, but so how many?
it was only 20 tanks.
Okay, okay.
So it was only 20 tanks
So
we
you're
had to worry
you're
about.
coordinating 20 tanks with crews to get onto these flatbeds of 3 each.
That's right.
Okay, okay.
So then after we got down there, everything was assembled. So they came in with a locomotive, and we had one man per tank was riding in it. And the rest of them were in regular passenger coach, you know.
Let me just interrupt for a moment. Up until this time, what was the kind of weather you were used to?
Well, it was fairly nice, you know. It was beginning of the spring,
Okay.
so it was pretty nice weather.
But you'd been in snow before, you'd been
Oh
in
yeah,
that
that
kind of
was
things.
nothing new.
Okay.
I was a skier and everything,
Okay.
you know. So there was nothing new there.
Okay. So now the flatbeds are loaded. Where do you go from there?
Then we went from there towards Italy. The train always had preference, you know, they go through. Went to Italy all the way down to Naples.
Now, on the train itself, were you part of the officers? Was there an officers?
Well, no, there were compartments. These were the older type. So I was together with my top sergeant and all the
Bunk bed kind
bumped
of?
that
Okay.
up, yeah.
Okay.
They were in the compartments.
On the train trip over, were there any kind of staff meetings or discussions about what you're going to do, or?
Well, they gave me a stack of papers to read to the guys, you know, what to expect and how to get moving. And they told us also that when we get into Italy and not to get off the plane, even if the train should stop for any length of time, everybody stays put. And they came through and they brought some food, you know, canned food and bread. So we helped ourselves.
So the train trip took about approximately how long to get?
2 days
2 days. And you landed where?
in Naples.
Okay. Did you
Naples in the harbor.
Okay. And you got off there?
So we got off, we drove the tanks off, put them down on the quay for the ship to be put on. So then we had an ordnance officer from the Afrika Korps itself. He was there, so I reported to him. And before I left, I had the paperwork, which was about a package that size, you know, wrapped with seals all over the place. And I'm supposed to turn that over to Rommel or the staff in Africa.
Did you know at this point you're going to be on Rommel's staff?
No,
Oh,
no,
okay.
no, I
okay.
didn't know.
Okay, good.
But you have to report to the staff,
Gotcha.
you know, because
Okay.
they assign us then to wherever we go, as a unit or as broken up company, you know,
So you boarded onto these
under these ships.
ships, and
Yeah.
the ships, the same ships that you had the tanks on?
Yeah,
Must have been huge ships.
they weren't that big. They were just freighters. They were all on deck, that stuff.
Where were the tanks?
On deck,
On the deck.
on the deck, because they didn't have big holes, you know, to put them in. They had some of it for ammunition and stuff like that, and for other parts and spare parts and so forth. They had that, they went down into the hold. And we were not told where we would go, where we would land, or anything else. So the ordnance officer said, you will be landing in Tripoli. But what we want to do is we only leave the drivers plus one man with the tanks. The other one's going to be flown over with JU-52s. You leave from Naples from the airport and fly over to Tripoli. So before the ship gets there, you be there. But that way, if anything happens, we don't lose everything.
So you flew.
So we flew in JO-52s and with the rest of the company.
And where'd you arrive in?
We arrived there within 2.5 hours, you know.
Okay. And where'd you go?
Well, in Tripoli, we were in the harbor area.
Right. So
And we came back into the harbor area because we were supposed to be there as soon as they arrived. We had MPs with us. They told us where to stay. And there were some warehouses down there. We slept in there till the next morning because they were coming through the night with the ships. So early in the morning hours, the ships were in, and they started in loading right away. And that's what we were told from the ordnance officers. Everything has to go fast. We don't want anybody coming around with observation planes or bombers or anything like that. Get the stuff off and get it underneath palm trees or something. Not directly, don't store it directly in the harbor area. Follow the orders from the MPs.
up until this point, there was no real sense of danger. But I guess at this point, when they're telling you all this kind of things, you must realize that now you're getting into wartime conditions.
That's right.
Do you need to take some water?
Yeah, I think it's luck.
Is my stomach grumbling showing up at all?
A little bit, but it's only on your channel.
Oh, so it's not affecting him.
No.
Oh, okay. All right. Sure.
What year is this, by the way?
Pardon me?
What year is all this happening in?
41.
41, okay.
End of 41. We got extra,
Rolling? Okay, good.
extra boxes.
Starting roll and go ahead.
Okay. So you're all loaded up now. Your equipment is all there. The machine gun bullets
That's
are there.
right.
Everything else. So what do you do now?
So the MPs were there with motorcycles. And they said, you follow us. Well, they gave us something to eat in between there after the crews were there and everything. And so they said, well, we're ordered to take you out to headquarters in Agaila. So we went out to Agaila, which took us quite a while,
Mm-hmm.
a whole day. And at the headquarters was just a tent, a large tent, with partitioned off for Rommel's area and his staff inside front.
What was the environment we're talking about?
Not much.
What was it? I mean,
Was
palm
just a
trees and lush
palm
greens?
trees and scrub, you know, and everything, and cactus and what have you.
So this is the desert already.
That's the desert
Okay.
already, yeah.
What was I had asked you earlier on about the kind of weather conditions you were used to. You'd been a skier, you'd been in snow, you'd
yeah.
been in Pleasant. What was this
Well, that
weather
was
like?
quite warm, and we discarded pretty stuff. Our jackets and everything came off in a hurry. But right away, the MP sergeant who was leading us, he said, don't have any one of your men take your shirt off. That's a court-martial offense if he gets burned to a crisp, because it's self-destruction. You should know that this is different. So don't take your shirt off, anybody. You can take your jackets off, but not your shirt.
I know how hot it is to be in the desert, but what's it like to be in a tank in a hot desert?
That's quite a bit warm. You know, we measured up to Fahrenheit, you know, like 100, 110, 120.
What was the reaction of your company? I mean, you're obviously in charge of all these people.
Yeah,
Did you have heat stroke? Did you have people that were keeling over? Or,
No, we didn't, because we stopped every 2 hours. All hatches were open. Even so, as was prohibitive because of the sand, because you left a cloud of sand from the first tank on. It was just a cloud of sand, and it all went in, you know. And nothing is safe, believe you me. It was just like powder, not sand, kernel sand. It was powder. It was terrible. Your eyes were burning, you know.
And this is your first, not only you, but also your company. This is the
whole
first
company.
time you've been in this kind of conditions
That's
before.
right. That's right. So, whatever chance we had to wash, we did.
Mm-hmm.
Good thing we did, because when we ended up where we were supposed to go, there was no water.
The sand is not only getting into your eyes and everything else, but it's getting into the equipment.
Yes.
Was there any problem developed because of that?
No, we really didn't, because the guys, right away, we had, for the gun nozzle, we had a pot to go over, you know, out of leather boot, to go over the gun. And on the inside, we had a cover-up, which was already developed before, I guess, to cover the optics and everything, and the locking mechanism from the machine guns, because there's two of them in a tank. One that the radio man has, and the other one is in the turret. And your whole breech, you know, they were all covered up. Your radio equipment as good as we could.
All right, your men and you have trained in these tanks. You talked about earlier about being in the woods, and it was a
Yeah.
lot of fun and all that. What was it like driving a tank in the sand?
Well, it is different in so far that all of a sudden you heard some, you know, different sound, because I got into the running gear, you know, and everything else, into the brake systems. And we were wondering how long these bearings would hold up, you know, because to take the tanks apart, your running gear apart, that's a major undertaking. Because you have to take your chain off, you know, your track, and then pull off the bogies.
Did this happen on your trip across?
No, we didn't have to pull any, and we didn't have to pull any chains off. But mentally, I prepared the guys for it. I said that could happen. So I asked the MPs, what happens? Do we stop the whole group? Or do we leave that tank behind and go around them? He said, no, you all have to stop. That's the best way to do it. Let everybody help. Without being in each other's ways, they could check their own equipment. So it wouldn't happen on another one.
All right, let's get an idea now. This is desolate desert terrain, very little foliage or trees or anything like that.
That's right.
It's hot,
Hot,
the sun's bearing down, and you've got 20
20
tanks
Yeah.
moving in one direction, following two motorcycles.
Yeah.
All right. Now, I'm not making a comparison between tank and car, but for example, a car driving on a regular highway drives in a certain way, but once there's ice on it, there's a certain amount of... What was it like to be in the tank? I mean, I don't want to compare it to ice, but what do you compare it to?
It's not that. It's just that you follow the contours more. You know, if it is wavy, it's wavy. It's just like driving in the sea. You know, it goes up and down, and the guy in the turret is going to be thrown back and forth up in there, sideways and back and forth. That's about the only difference.
Let's take this opportunity to tell me what the inside of the tank looks like. Where were you sitting? Who else was in this?
Well, we have one man more than Americans had. We have 5 men per tank. You have your driver, you have your radio man and machine gunner, you have your gunner, and your loader, and the commander. He's in the top. He looks out of the hole on top.
And there's a
And then
seat
comes
there for
down.
you.
There's a seat for him.
Okay.
That's a little hanging seat.
Now, here you're going up and down and across
Yeah,
and all
yeah.
that. What is? Give me an idea of what it was like to
Well,
be in
it
this
was
tank.
like on the sea, like you could get seasick, you know. But on the whole, you know, we were more concerned about the darn sand than anything else. You couldn't eat anything while you were driving because the sand would get into your food, and it was all canned food, unless it was crackers. You know, we had plenty of crackers.
Now, what do you wear? You got goggles?
Goggles, yeah.
Okay. And a hat?
Yeah.
Okay. And then your basic uniform?
Just like the hat is similar to your baseball caps, you know. which was the Afrika Korps.
You're in radio contact with the rest of the...
With everybody, with everybody.
Give us an idea, and I don't mean details, but give us an idea of you're moving along now. What kind of conversations were you having with the other tanks?
Well, I just ask of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, are you seeing your one in front? Are you keeping your distance? Because they're supposed to be 25 feet apart from one to the other. Is the dust getting too bad? Because you have the holes open, you know. How much sand do you get? Should we stagger the tanks? So we did for a while, we staggered the tanks. But then if there was a little bit of wind or something, you had to switch that back and forth.
I realize discipline is very high, okay?
Yeah.
But were there comments being made from the others, or was there any kind of sense of, you know, look out, or, oh, you're too close, anything?
No, it wasn't that much. There wasn't that much. The only complaint you heard of is that, darn it, that darn sand sticks to your skin because you're sweating. Now you can put grooves in your skin. Stuff like that, you know. Or it's so rough on the throat, you know, you got a whole mouth full of sand. You cough and everything, you have to get used to it. So a lot of them put handkerchiefs around the mouth and nose, just to be safe, you know.
So I would imagine as the lead tank is commander, is that right? Okay.
Well, the company commander is the lead tank.
Right. And each person has their own personality. So I imagine you're getting from the different groups, different comments from their different personalities. And the joker, the person who's very serious.
There's always a joke in between, you know, telling jokes and everything else. But I said, well, how about putting the radio on? There's some music. Well, we could get Radio Belgrade, you know, the Lily Marlene. So that was all right.
So about how long did it take for you to make the trip to Rommel's headquarters?
About 2 days.
Okay.
We stopped over during the night, you know.
Well, what was that like?
Well, we used to put tents together, you know, because we had them rolled up on the outside sections and they buttoned together. So you could put one over a barrel of the gun and stretch them out, you know, with string and find a rock or something because sand won't hold. And then you have blanket because we didn't have sleeping bags. We later on got them from the British, but
well, it was very hot during the day. What about at night?
At night we had coats, overcoats, greatcoats. And we had kidney belts, which were out of felt. They were about that wide and about an inch thick. You put that around because if you lay on the bare ground, you could get a hell of a fix with the moisture from your perspiration getting into the skin and really can give you a pain. It wasn't that simple. And water was at a premium because we only had 2 jerry cans with water. They're different color with white tar on it, you know. That indicates water.
What's a jerry can?
Well, a gasoline can, it's the same size, only they're painted different.
To tell the difference between water and gas.
The difference between the water and the gas.
Okay.
And there's also oil you have to worry about. Engine oil, you know, which you carry with you.
Now, at night you got a chance to eat.
Yes, because during the day, forget it.
Why?
With all the dust and everything, and the flies, it was just about impossible. Because if you had a cracker or something with something on it, whatever it was, if it was German conserves, like sausage or something in cans, then you had the flies all over. You know, you had to go like this all the time, all the way up to the mouth, or to make a little bit only and take that bite. It was horrible. Feeding yourself was something else, you know, because the flies were all over.
This is all the time?
Yeah.
They're everywhere?
Yeah, they're all over.
Okay.
There could be nothing there, but flies are plenty there. Mm-hmm. And everybody started to talk already. He said, what happens if you're wounded? You know, you get that out of static on on the radio. If somebody gets wounded, how you keep the flies off? Because your face probably be all exposed flesh, probably be perspiring, and you'll be having the flies all over you. Well, we have to find out from the ones who experience it what you can do.
The two MPs that were guiding you at night, did you have a chance to actually talk to them? Because these guys were experienced, right?
Yeah, we talked to them, but they weren't just going back and forth. They didn't have any frontline experience really, what was going on. And they didn't want to mislead you in any way. But at the same time, they said, that can be a bitch. And it's really getting hot and cooling off in a hurry. Or you have a sandstorm. Everything comes to a stop. You don't move.
That didn't happen when you went to Aguilar?
No.
Okay.
That didn't happen when we
Okay.
went from Aguilar.
Aguilar. Okay, now you arrive in what you describe as a jump-off area?
No, that was headquarters. The jump-off area was about another 10 miles.
All right, so you arrive at headquarters,
We
and
arrive
what
in-
your 20 tanks now arrive at headquarters.
Yeah.
What happens? They're dispersed, so what
the,
happens?
The MPs guided the tanks to a separate area. They were from the tent, from the headquarters area, about 500 yards, because they didn't want that sand all over them. So they were about 500 yards away from them. And I told the crew to make themselves as comfortable as they can, get out of the hot sun if it is possible. Set up some sort of a tent, you know, and they did that. And then they had, from the MPs, they came over and they said if they needed any water, because it's very scarce, so they can get refill their field canteen, you know, which they did.
Was
Because
there
that we told them right away, if anything is off, take it. I don't know when the next time comes.
Was there any accommodation at that time to clean the tanks off? Did they have an area where you clean tanks? Because this was headquarters after all.
That has nothing to do. Headquarters was headquarters. There was no physical work really done. That's why they put us off to the side so we could check all our stuff.
So where did you go? What you?
Then I was guided by the MPs to the tent. And there was one area, attachment, was a holding area, you know. You went in there. And then Bayerlein, the 1A, he came out. He was a colonel at that time. He came out and I was assistant to Rommel. And the MPs told him that he just guided us here. Then he turned around and looked at me and I said, you have any paperwork for me? And I said, yes, here it is. And I gave it to him. I said, these are the papers from the company which I put together in Kaiserslautern. He said, good. Rommel isn't here right now, but we're expecting him any minute.
What?
So he should be here very shortly.
Let me stop you here for a moment. If I ever was in a position to have met Eisenhower or MacArthur or Claire Chennault or something, who of course were very famous during that period of time, there'd be a certain amount of trepidation. You had not met Rommel before.
No, no.
What was your reaction to Rommel's about to come here? I mean, you're
Well,
a young kid still.
I didn't know. I didn't know what to think. I went through my mind, what do I say? You report to him, just like I reported to the base commander, you know, salute and stand attention and rattle your little story off. So what were you going to do? With Bayerlein, it wasn't too bad, you know, he was a colonel. Well, I'm used to colonels running around. So I saluted there and I told my little story, and that was when he said, well, you have to wait a little bit, and we are in radio connection with him, so he should be here not too long. He asked me if my company had food and everything, and if they had something to eat or if they needed anything. I said, well, they offered water and everything. We have field rations. He said, don't use your iron rations. We feed you with our stuff. We have a kitchen here. He said that probably would be nice because I don't want anybody to touch the iron ration, what we call it. That ration should be only eaten on order and not before. When you had for 24 hours nothing to eat, or 48 hours nothing to eat, then you could dig into that iron ration, which was a can, of meat product, either sausage or a meat, and some crackers.
This is emergency
Emergency
okay,
ration,
I
yeah.
understand. Sure.
We didn't have all that good stuff like the American Army had.
Now, in between the time that you talked to the colonel and then met with Rommel, did you go and have something to eat? What did you do?
Well, I had something to eat, yeah. Some of the other guys too, they wanted something. So they used the privilege of the kitchen, and they got a tray and
So this is like a buffet. You have an iron tray.
yeah,
you slap
yeah,
this
that's
on,
right.
slap that on.
That's right.
Got a chance to
They
eat
had
something.
to wait about 15 minutes till they had it heated up, with gas heaters, and then you got your food there.
Well, this is the first hot food you've had in a long
Yes,
time.
yes.
Were there a lot of flies in there?
No, that's the funny part of it is they had this sticky paper hanging from the ceilings. So I always told the guys, don't stand underneath one of those darn things. If it falls down, you're going to have a hell of a time getting it off yourself. So they had something to eat, and I had something to eat and to drink. And then, like I said, it took about a half an hour. And then Rommel came in. I saw his staff car coming in, and I waited till he was out of the car and got into his tent.
What was your first impression seeing him?
Well, it was, I thought I would be more surprised. A typical Prussian general, but he wasn't. He was so leger, he made you at ease right away. Like I waited for a little bit, and he actually, because Bayerlein was in with him, and he gave him the thing, I gave him time, and then Bayerlein came out and he said, come on in. So I went in, I saluted, and rattled off my little verse. And he said, I see you were at Potsdam, huh? Well, that was my school. So he said, give me about 10 minutes. I want to read the cover letter. So he opened up the package and he read the cover letter. I said, okay. Who made the setup? Crew by crew, because everything is detailed. Like every tank, they're detailed. The only thing is, you have A, B, C, the alphabet letters. Didn't they issue any tank letters? I said, no recognition letters. They're supposed to be done here, because we don't know where we would go. He said, well, I tell you what, from what I read here, I think I keep you right here, because you put that company together? He said, yes, sir. He said, I'm very short of officers, because a lot of them couldn't take it here. Too much heat, yellow jaundice, you name it. Heart attacks from the older ones. That's why I don't want any more officers over 40. 35, 40 the maximum, because they can't take it. And he wasn't very old either. He was 48 years old. So he said, I tell you what, I know you're too young and you're too low in the rank of being a company commander, which is usually a captain. But you're doing the service of a company commander. That's what we call appointed commander. or a Diensttour, you do the service of a company commander in a lower rank. But right now, I don't have anybody to put in command of the company you brought. So bear with me. You stay in command of that company till further notice. And that stayed there forever. Because shortly after that I was there, I got my first lieutenant, you know, my first pip on there. And I said, well, make your headquarters company for time being, till we know exactly what's going on. Because we're regrouping here. We have Italians, we have Germans. So the Afrika Korps is a German unit, but you have to earn your stripe Afrika Korps. That you have to earn. You have to be at least 2 months here in Africa before you get that stripe.
Gerd, when you went back to your company, you've just been appointed by Rommel to, in effect, be the company commander.
That's right.
Was there a sense of pride on the part of your men and your junior officers, juniors, that they're part of this? I mean, this has to be a pretty big honor.
Oh yes, it was. It was. They were right around me. They said, is that perfect? Is that going to be forever or what? Or is it just temporary till we are broken up? I said, I can't tell you that, but right now, that's what the general said, we stay together as a unit. So if we're going to be fighting as a unit or not, that I don't know. That would be in his hands.
Because, you know, in many ways, people who, not only in a military organization, but also a business organization, where the person who's in charge gets a special honor like that, everybody shares in that honor.
Well, there wasn't a cheering going up or anything.
Well, no,
like
I don't mean that, but there had to be a sense of pride in...
A sense of pride, yes, that they could stay together. Because they were staying together right from the day that company was conceived. You know, in Kaiserslautern, they trained together, they came together over here, over to Africa, and we're still together up in Agaila.
When you went to bed that night, I know this is a long time ago, but when you went to bed last night, was there a smile on your lips, or?
No, not really, because I didn't know myself what they expected. You know, I mean, expectation can carry you away, and you expect things which never will happen. So I didn't want to lead myself into something I cannot get out of it. My dad always told me, he said, don't expect any more than you think you deserve. And don't put what you deserve too high on the peg, because it very seldom happens. Because he knew from experience. And he said, whatever you do your job. But don't rattle the bush, because it can backfire. Take care of your man and take care of yourself the best way you can. I know wartime is no insurance.
So,
30 minutes left.
okay. Where do we go from here? What was your next assignment then? And now that you're all gathered together, you're in this
Well,
company.
we were assigned up to the front line, first from Mogadavia there. He said, we have a liaison officer from the Ariete, the Italian tank division Ariete. And we have a liaison from our own troops, which are already in position. So what I want to do is I want to take from each one of the liaison officers from the Italian, who speaks German, and also from our own, to take you on a little orientation trip tomorrow. Do you have field glasses? I said, yeah, they're still in my box, because we had them issued in Kaiserslautern. He said, okay, take your field glasses with you, that's important. And pad. You got one of your my cards. They said, take that one with you. And we have some some area maps. They're kind of crude. They don't give you much, but it's the best we have. So we give you one of these maps. So you can mark positions in there, distances and everything else, whatever you can. Put it on a map. Don't depend on your mind and memory altogether, because here all looks the same. After a while you find out, no matter where you look, you go out in the evening, at night, you go in circles. You go to your heartbeat. That's the circle you make. You're always going to end up the same place you started from, because it looks the same. And at night in Africa, if it's a clear night, that's fine. But it can be a real overcast night. It's pitch black. So don't wander off, because you could get lost. We have people who were taken prisoners because of that. And we took prisoners because of that from the other side. They got lost.
Now, what was the actual assignment? You're looking at the Rommel himself called you in and said you're going here, or was
No,
it,
no,
okay.
no. The 1A took care of that byline. He had the map. It was a big map out in the area. And he said, you got a map and overlay? And I said, yes. He said, so put these points down. So we want you to take these, and you go out with these people and take a look. Now, in the meantime, we find out where there is support needed. Then we might break up your company even and put one platoon there, another one there, and another one there. Like as Corsairs, you know, just like Corsairs stays. If they have marked trees and they're used to it, so they went already through some of it, you can get some information from them, from other company commanders.
Gerd, forgive me, you have to realize I'm asking some of these questions because people have no idea, or a lot of people won't have any idea what desert warfare is like, all right? Let me try and understand. You have, within Rommel's staff, you're told that there's this grid, right? Is that what we're talking about? It's like a grid, okay? A patch of desert.
That's right.
We're talking
That's
about,
right.
right?
Right.
It's not like you can say, well, there's a landmark here or a landmark there.
Mm-hmm.
So somebody must have done some reconnaissance of this area, and that the enemy is here.
Yeah.
Okay? You're supposed to go out and engage the enemy or find out where the enemy is, or
this was set up already.